Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is November 11th, 2023. Oh, we got a lot to talk about again tonight. And so we're gonna get into it in right proper order. It's gonna be a bit of a bumpy ride tonight, so you might want to brace yourselves, but we're also going to have a little bit of fun, as we always try to. So, there's that as well. We're going to go through our regular rundown of the week in Alberta politics, and then we are going to, if there's anybody, I realized that we bumped the time for tonight, moved it from Sunday to Saturday, so some of our regulars may not be kicking around, but after we're done our rundown of the week in Alberta politics, we're going to open up the open mic to anybody who wants to tag in. If that's something that you're interested in doing, you can do so on the X Twitter Spaces, on any cellular device. You can't do it on computers yet because Elon wants to send a rocket to Mars, but he can't apparently figure out how to make Spaces work on an iPad. Do with that what you will. It's pretty obvious, though, where we got to start the conversation tonight, because today is November 11th. It is very much Remembrance Day. And so we got some things that we got to talk about in regards to that, because we've seen some concerning things over the last little while in regards to the gratitude that we should be expressing to people who have served in the armed forces, and the lessons that Remembrance Day is designed to teach us, to remind us of, so that we can remember. Because those who have experienced the horrors of war have said they don't want to do that, and they wouldn't wish that on anyone. They'll serve their country because that's the kind of amazing men and women that we have who serve in the armed forces in Canada. But that's not a thing that they're like excited to go do. It's something that they recognize they have to go do in order to preserve our society, in order to preserve freedom. Because freedom does require sacrifice. And the people who serve in our armed forces understand that very basic and critical tenet to make any society work. But unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot of people who have decided that they're going to put themselves ahead of the society that Canada is trying to create and trying to work towards. When we're putting this episode together, the words that kept coming up were the notion of lest we forget. Now, that's a term that's been used in quite a few places, but it's a warning more than anything else. If we forget why it is that these wars were fought, the costs that people paid for wars, then we're setting ourselves up for a tremendous amount of trouble, because one of the other quotes that we use a lot on this show is those who fail to remember history are bound to repeat it, or those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it. And it seems like there's a lot of people who are forgetting their history. So we want to talk a little bit about that tonight because it's important. So to start off with, one of the first things that we want to talk about is the National War Memorial. So the National War Memorial is in the capital of Canada, and it is, to many, a sacred space. Not necessarily sacred for religious reasons, but it is a national symbol. It's a national reminder of the sacrifices that people have made in order to serve their country or preserve the ideals that the country strives for. And I want to be really, really clear. I am not romanticizing conflict, and I'm not romanticizing the history of Canada. The history of Canada is a messy, messy place, and we're going to talk about a little bit of that in just a minute here. But there are ideals that this country has grown and adopted and instituted in the Charter and instituted in the Constitution. And in many cases, those are the same kind of ideals that are what inspired people to try to protect this country. So the National War Memorial is a pretty big deal. It's a pretty significant place. But unfortunately, it's also a place where people have, on occasion, chosen to behave incredibly badly. And we're not talking about the distant past. We're talking about a year ago. This is a video that was tweeted out by a Rear Admiral in the Canadian Armed Forces. And it's important to watch it and take a look at how easily people forget. That's from January of 2022. That is people dancing on the war memorial. Now, there were other indignities that were committed towards the war memorial by people who were there ostensibly in the name of freedom, ostensibly in the name of preserving Canada. Many of those people pictured themselves as being some sort of freedom fighter. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, in the conversation about the war memorial and the convoy, inevitably you'll have people who will say, no, it was just a couple bad eggs. You know, the veterans, they were there too. And there were some veterans there, for sure. But here's the thing. In any profession, there are people who are wrong. And when we take a look at what happened after that day at the war memorial, fences were put up around the war memorial to protect it. And people involved with the convoy, people who were there to support the convoy, and yes, some veterans who were there with the convoy, decided that they were going to, instead of letting those fences protect the war memorial from vandalism, they illegally tore those fences down. Because it was their memorial, which completely misses the point of any memorial. Memorials are there to serve as a reminder. They are not there for your personal possessions. And you don't have to look very far to see the face of the woman who was dancing on the war memorial. After she got off, she turned and faced the camera with a great big smile full of contempt. This is the reality of where segments of our society are right now. These are people who have very clearly been so long insulated from the consequences and the horrors of war that they have lost all respect for what these monuments and memorials are supposed to remind us of. And it's not just the dancing. People use the war memorial as a parking lot during the convoy, because they had to find somewhere to park their great big giant trucks in order to occupy Ottawa. And it wasn't about people being at the war memorial to honor the war memorial. We saw an abundance of all kinds of different flags present there, not the least of which were American flags, not the least of which were flags supporting Trump. There is without any question, a shortage of nationally sacred spaces that exist. And that's not a bad thing. There's certainly monuments that have been removed from public spaces that absolutely should be, in my humble opinion, removed from public spaces. Monuments that perhaps are better placed in museums because they are directly tied to some of the darker parts of Canadian history. That's okay. But the spaces that we have where we should all be able to get together and say, hey, you know what? There were some young folks who believed in the country. They believed in the values that the country espoused and espouses. And they went to foreign countries to stop what they believed was evil. And many of them gave their lives in the service of Canada. That's an incredibly important thing. And when we have people who are, instead of giving these monuments and giving these spaces the respect that they deserve, and instead making them their own personal property, it really underscores the importance of that phrase, lest we forget. Because when we do forget, when we allow other people to forget, this is what comes of it. So today, we wanted to, before we get into our weekly roundup, we wanted to talk a little bit about a part of Canada's history that's very closely tied, intimately tied to World War I and World War II and the Korean War. I mean, really, any conflict since World War I that often goes underappreciated. And again, in the spirit of lest we forget, understanding and knowing our own history is critically important to making sure that we don't repeat those mistakes. So today, we wanted to talk about November 11th in a way, but also November 8th. November 8th is Indigenous Veterans Day. And there's a lot of people who are on the social media machines asking the questions, why is it that Indigenous Veterans Day should be recognized? Shouldn't it just be Remembrance Day? Why do we have to have a separate thing? And the truth of the matter is, there were people, Indigenous First Nations folks, who signed up to go fight in World War I and in World War II. Because they were trying to protect, some people have said that they were trying to protect the treaties because they didn't want to lose their treaty rights if the crown fell. But some of them were just trying to do what they believed was right. And why this is so important is because in the process of doing those things, they got screwed by the country that they were standing up to serve. There's a very important book that I believe every Canadian should read. It's called 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And there's a section in here that gets to be particularly relevant. The author of the book, Bob Joseph, also has a website. And I want to read a couple of paragraphs directly from that website tonight before we get into the Alberta politics part. After the First World War, many First Nations veterans from the Second World War found that when they returned home after fighting overseas for Canada, they were no longer considered Indians because the Indian Act specified that Indians absent from the reserve for 4 years were no longer Indians. So people who left reserves to go and serve their country, loaded terminology that is, they went to go to do the training. They were then deployed overseas. And when they got back, because they'd been gone for 4 years, the Indian Act, which in many ways existed to completely erase their history anyways and their culture, took away their status. They were no longer considered to be Indians. After the Second World War, many status Indian soldiers had to become enfranchised before they could sign up to fight in the Second World War, which meant when they returned to their home communities, they no longer had Indian status. So if you wanted to serve Canada to protect the treaties or to protect the crown, or because I'm not going to speculate on what anyone's motivations were, if you wanted to do any of those things, you had to become enfranchised. You had to buy into the idea of Canada as a country. And in the process of doing so, you lost your Indian status. Many Second World War veterans, including Tommy George Prince, the most decorated Indigenous war veteran, whose medals included the American Silver Star and 6 service medals, re-enlisted for the Korean War simply because they were unable to re-enter their previous lives. And this is another recent but important piece to remember. It wasn't until 1995, 50 years after the Second World War, that Indigenous peoples were allowed to lay wreaths at the National War Monument. If we don't learn from our history, we're bound to repeat it. So we wanted to take a second to remind people Canada's history is not perfect. But it's the ideals that we aspire to that make it a nation worth fighting for. The people who serve in the armed forces, the vast majority of them, again, I can't speak really, I can't speak for any service person because I've never served in the armed forces. But there's a basic acceptance of the idea that freedom requires sacrifice. Freedom requires people to stand up and say, there are going to be people who try to take away your freedoms. There are going to be people who try to degrade society. There are going to be people who do all of those things because they're interested only in themselves. And there have to be people who stand up, maybe don't get to go to the barbecues, maybe don't get to spend the time with their families, maybe have to go across the world to say societies and the values that societies are built on are important. The notion, the expression has been around for a very long time. Freedom isn't free. And it's really important to understand that. Because there's a lot of people who are running around these days who seem to be operating under the notion that they should just get their freedom just because. And if their freedom happens to affect other people, oh, well, it's my God-given freedom. And that's just not the way that it works. And if there's a day of the year where we're supposed to take a step back and remember what freedom requires, what society requires, it's today. Moving on from there, and what's probably going to be the hardest pivot that we've done in a while, let's get into the Alberta politics. And we're going to start Alberta politics by starting about the Alberta Party. On November 6th, 2023, the Alberta Party finally announced that the leader of the Alberta Party, Barry Morishita, had resigned. The Alberta Party Political Association announces the resignation of leader Barry Morishita. With sadness, the Alberta Party Board of Directors announces the resignation of Barry Morishita from his position as party leader, effective the 15th of October, 2023. So it took him like 3 weeks to make the announcement. After 2 years of service dedicated to promoting and building the party, Barry is moving on to the next chapter in his storied career, and we wish him continued success. Now, Barry's been on the show here a couple of times, and I got to say, I like Barry. I think Barry is an incredibly principled man. I think he is extraordinarily well-behaved. He's deeply respectful of everybody that I've seen him interact with. And it's certainly a loss for the Alberta Party. But in true Alberta Party brand, it's kind of interesting how this announcement was made, I don't know, the day after we made a bunch of jokes about the Alberta Party not having announced that their leader had left, despite the fact that he made the announcement on our show on August 10th. So depending on how you choose to read the room, it was either 3 weeks late or maybe closer to 3 months. But there's a lot of people who are hoping that the Alberta Party maybe steps up a little bit, maybe gets a little bit organized. And we've seen some of this in some recent polling. Now, of course, all of the polling caveats that we always have on the show apply here. But it's important to realize when we're talking about polling, we're talking about snapshots in time, and any sort of major event can change how those polling numbers would go. And there's a lot of people who say, the only poll that matters is on election day. And while that's in a pure sense true, it's not entirely accurate. Because politicians, political parties, political staffers all pay very close attention to polling. And when things start to shift, especially in a significant way, that can influence policy decisions, that can influence government decisions. We certainly saw during the pandemic, Mr. Kenney's approach to pandemic management was largely predicated on what's going to be the most popular, what's going to not hurt me the most in the polls. So polling is relevant when it comes out. And there was some new polling information that came out from Leger the week. There was actually 2 polls that came out. The first one had to do with the voting intentions. And this speaks to how does each party measure up for support? Who's winning, who's losing? And in a fascinating little twist, there's been some movement. So, for example, the UCP, who back in September had a commanding lead, they were sitting at 49% approval or voter intention, and the NDP were only sitting at 39. There's been a change, 47 and 46%. So the NDP have picked up quite a bit of steam. 7 points isn't nothing. Now, where it gets interesting is where the other pickup places have happened, because the Alberta Party picked up a couple of points. They're still well below the 10% mark, but it's interesting that their numbers actually went up a little bit, certainly since the election, when, I mean, as I said earlier, Barry Morishita announced his intentions to leave as leader of the party back in August. So a party that hasn't done anything is able to pick up some points. That says, some people are saying, that there's some folks that are looking for an option that isn't necessarily the UCP or the NDP. Now, it's not a lot of folks because, as we've said on the show before, it's very clear that we're in a two-party state in the province of Alberta right now, and certainly will likely be that way for the foreseeable future. It's going to be very interesting to watch where the Alberta Party takes all of this. Is the moral of that little bit there. But the other poll that Leger released had to do with the Alberta pension plan. And there's some interesting little tidbits in here. Because while there has been a slight increase in the people who would support an Alberta pension plan, it's gone from 21% to 27%, there's still 24% that don't know, and there's still 48% that say, I absolutely don't want an Alberta pension plan. And that's not insignificant. One would expect to see a few points bumped up in the, yeah, okay, maybe a pension plan's a good idea, given the hard campaign that the provincial government has rolled out in order to try to convince people. Right now, the UCP is in the middle of an $8 million campaign to convince Albertans, hey, you know what we should really, really do? We should have ourselves that pension plan. $8 million. That's a lot of convincing. And they're also running, perhaps somewhat notoriously, their town halls. Now, the town halls have been a little bit criticized of late because there's a lot of people who have attended them or listened to them after the fact who are a little bit dismayed. To read from a recent story by Dean Bennett, the panel hearing from Albertans on quitting the Canada Pension Plan argued with callers and tried to persuade naysayers in its third telephone town hall session Thursday night. And it happened. There were a good number of people who called into the town hall. They managed to get past the screening process somehow, who said, hey, you know what? I think this is a really terrible idea. And I don't believe that Alberta is a monolith. I've got family in BC. I've got family in Ontario. I've got family in other provinces that do access the Canada Pension Plan. And I'm not really okay with saying, screw everybody else, I want what's mine. Even though the whole premise of I want what's mine is incredibly flawed. And this was one thing that panel chair Jim Dinning didn't seem to have any problems on doubling down repeatedly, despite the fact that multiple callers said, hey, if you could stop saying that Alberta overpays, that would be great, because it's an incredibly loaded term, it's an emotional term, and it doesn't actually represent what's going on. And as Trevor Toom explained in our episode with him, which if you haven't watched, you definitely should, send it to all your friends and family, because this is an important concept. What Trevor Toom explained was basically right now in the province of Alberta, there are more people who are paying into their individual pension plans than there are people who are collecting from their individual pension plans. So if you look at it from a certain angle in the right light, it kind of sort of looks like Albertans are paying more. But in order to get to that place, you have to ignore the fact that everybody pays into their own pension plan, and what they pay determines what their pension's going to be. And this was tragically illustrated by one caller who called in and who said he was a senior, He was collecting pension. And his question was, I'm only getting $300 from the CPP. Is the APP going to pay me more? Now, this is an individual who presumably did not spend that much time paying into the pension plan. And so the panel had to say, well, no, you wouldn't. But, you'd have all of these other potential advantages because, with the save money, we could potentially pay you more, or we could potentially do this or whatever. But they also heavily went after people who were raising concerns about the pension plan. And it can't be said too much. Nobody overpays. That's not a thing that happens. It also can't be said too much that Daniel Smith has moved the goalposts in a pretty big way in regards to what these consultations are supposed to be. When she first rolled them out, it was supposed to be, we're going to listen to Albertans. We want to hear what Albertans think. But she very recently said in multiple different forums, she said it on her radio shows, she said it with Ryan Jesperson. Well, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate Albertans what the advantages would be. So it's not a consultation. It's not a listening session. It's a sales pitch. And that's really all that it is. But that's far from the biggest story of the week. And we're still far from the biggest story of the week. But there were some really big stories that we got to talk about. The next one has to be, so there's this show that's happening. Tucker Carlson, fired Fox News pundit, host. The only really good thing that I can say about Tucker Carlson is that he gave the universe the interview with Jon Stewart, where Jon Stewart absolutely, when they were doing Crossfire, Jon Stewart absolutely took him out for a walk. It was glorious. I strongly recommend, once you're done watching or listening to the show, of course, because, vanity. Go ahead, look up on the YouTubes, Jon Stewart Crossfire, and watch Tucker Carlson absolutely get his ass handed to him by one of the comedic geniuses of our time. But a lot of people very upset about Tucker Carlson, the fired Fox News host, coming to Alberta. And a lot of people who aren't paying attention to Tucker Carlson, with good reason, are saying, why is everybody so upset? Tucker Carlson has voiced support for Vladimir Putin. He's pushed the Great Replacement theory, which is a theory that there's some sort of vast conspiracy that's going on to replace white people in society. He's lamented the loss of manlyhood, which is wild because, it's Tucker Carlson. So, there's that. He says that racism isn't a problem. He supported the January 6th riot. He's compared women to dogs. He complained that Mars made, and this is a quote for the record, Mars made their M&M characters as unattractive as possible. The green M&M lost her sexy boots. The brown M&M, her stiletto heels. The company added obese and distinctly frumpy lesbian M&Ms. So the dude who fetishizes candy. Tucker Carlson also said of Canada, I'm completely in favor of a Bay or Pigs operation to liberate that country. Why should we stand back and let our biggest trading partner, the country with which we share the longest border, and actually, I'll just say a great country. I love Canada. I've always loved Canada because of its natural beauty. Why should we let it become Cuba? Why don't we liberate it? We're spending all this money to liberate Ukraine from the Russians. Why are we not sending an armed force north to liberate Canada from Trudeau? And I mean it. Now, I'm not sure that anyone saying, you know what we should do? We should do a Bay of Pigs invasion is particularly qualified to talk about let's go with anything, because a cursory, if you're not familiar with the Bay of Pigs invasion, a cursory Google search will tell you that in the land of military blunders, it's way at the top of the list. Tucker Carlson was also revealed in the Dominion voting lawsuit that he knowingly lied to his audience to preserve their outrage and keep their viewership. Well, he's coming to Calgary, and he's sharing a stage with the Premier of Alberta because, of course, he is. So a misogynistic, racist, candy fetishing, lying foreign policy disaster of a human is coming to Calgary, and Smith can't wait to sit down with him because of the size of his audience. It's not like, Tucker Carlson has said some pretty horrifying things about why shouldn't I root for Russia, which I am. I mean, at least he's got some things in common with Danielle Smith. That was a boilerplate statement that was mailed out to multiple media outlets from her press secretary. And it's pretty weak. The Premier participates in a variety of public and private events and does interviews with dozens of reporters, broadcasters, and podcasters from across the political spectrum. Obviously, she does not subscribe to every view of every interviewer or reporter she speaks with, whether that's the CBC, the Toronto Star, or Tucker Carlson. The Premier aims to share Alberta's message with as many people as possible, whether they're from Alberta, Canada, or around the world. Now, here's where that's, let's go with a little bit disingenuous. First of all, Take Back Alberta has been very, very clear. Hey, you know what? We've got tickets. We got special deal tickets. And if you want to get some tickets and not have to pay the Ticketmaster fee, almost as if we've got an inside scoop with this thing, and I'm just speculating here, maybe they were involved in the organization of the event. You can buy your tickets from us. We can call it a donation, even though they can't issue tax receipts. But there's a big difference between doing an interview and being a headliner at a sensationalistic for-profit event with someone who has made a career out of being as sensationalistic as possible and deliberately manipulating and lying to their audience. And I can say all of that because a boatload of the internal text messages that were released as part of the Dominion lawsuit made it very, very clear that there were several high-profile anchors, personalities, I'm not sure what to call them at Fox News, who bullshit mountain, to take a little bit from one of my inspirations from the folks at Bullshit Mountain. They all knew that they were lying. They were concerned that they weren't far right enough for their audience. They were concerned that the Fox News was being outflanked on Bullshit Mountain. There was a new Bullshit Mountain that was being accumulated. And they were concerned that they were going to lose their audience share. They were concerned that they were going to lose money. And so they leaned into all of the conspiracy theories and all of the bullshit. Now, one would be tempted to argue that's not a venue, a for-profit event with somebody with a history of racist, misogynistic, dishonest views. That's not a venue for any head of state to be attending, especially when it's a for-profit event. There's a big difference between somebody coming on a podcast or doing an interview. No money changes hands. But Tucker Carlson commands a pretty significant speaking fee. And the fact that Danielle Smith is lending not only her presence, which is up to her. I mean, I don't know how much credibility that Danielle Smith has with objective, critical thinking individuals. I'm just speculating it may not be all that much. But one would make the argument that she should not be lending the credibility and the gravitas of the office of the Premier to a for-profit event that is going to see money going into the pockets of a hate monger so she can tell Alberta's story. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the developments in the legislature because there's a couple of new bills that we gotta talk about for a quick sec. There's a couple of other like minor bills that will get destroyed because they're coming from the NDP and they're a minority, and the UCP seem to have made it very clear that it's their agenda that matters and all else be damned. But we got to talk about a couple of these bills. So there's Bill 7. Was a new bill that was introduced this week. And in order to understand Bill 7, it's kind of a nothing burger bill. It's fascinating how the UCP have like peppered in these like nothing burger bills with these they're doing what bills? And tonight we have two bills we're going to talk about. The first one's nothing burger bill. It's Bill 7. It's the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Amendment Act. And basically what this bill is about is it comes out of frustration that software engineers and people who were hiring software engineers were experiencing when they were putting up job postings saying, hey, you know what? We need to hire this software engineer to engineer some software. That's what we need. And APEGA said, yeah, you're not allowed to do that. Engineer in Alberta is a protected title, which leaves me with all kinds of questions about, well, what do you call the people who drive the trains then? But it literally comes from the question of whether or not a software engineer can call themselves a software engineer in the province of Alberta, or whether nobody can use the word engineer. Period, end of sentence. Except for engineers that are registered with APEGA. Well, this legislation seeks to say, you know what? It's okay if they call themselves software engineers. I don't think anyone's gonna be too concerned about the fact that they don't have one of the rings. It's all right. So that's Bill 7. And like I said, it's a bit of a nothing burger. But that brings us to Bill 8. And Bill 8 is decidedly not a nothing burger. Bill 8 is the Justice Statutes Amendment Act. And there's some silliness in it. Well, not silliness, but some minor things that exist in the bill. It's got multiple different things that it wants to address. It's like a mini omnibus bill. It defines what an incapacitated person is. It talks about streamlined trials, which are trials where they accept written evidence as opposed to oral testimony. It expands the number of terms for justices of the peace. It increases the number of judges in the province. And then we get to where it turns into a really big problem. Because it makes radical changes to the Conflict of Interest Act. I really can't overstate how big of a deal the changes that they're making are to the Conflict of Interest Act. It's almost impossible to overstate it. But instead of me trying to explain why this bill and why these amendments are being made to the Conflict of Interest Act, maybe it would be better if I just let the Premier of the province do it.
I have to tell you, I want to be respectful of the position, but there are certain things that we have been told are that I cannot do. For instance, during the stampede, I was told I could only be in the suites for 20 minutes at a time. When I receive ribbon skirts as a matter of protocol, it's been questioned whether I'm allowed to keep them. They're probably only valued at $40. Been told I can't do dishes in my husband's restaurant, even though I'm volunteering to do that. So I just have to say that I think that there are some tweaks we may need.
There's some tweaks we may need. Now, we addressed the offensive nature of the comments around the ribbon skirts because that's a pretty impressively inept description of ribbon skirts and their value monetarily as well as intrinsic. But what this bill does is it changes the rules for what the limits are on gifts that politicians can accept. And it changes it in such a way that it's actually cabinet that gets to decide what those limits are. So what Premier Smith was complaining about there was she wasn't allowed to go sit in the owner's box for a Battle of Alberta game. That's what precipitated that whole conversation with Jespo. And she then went on to complain about how during the Stampede, she wasn't allowed to hang out in the very high-end, very expensive, purchased by people who have obviously a very big interest in influencing government decisions. She wasn't allowed to hang out there and enjoy that opulence because it would be inappropriate and it would run the risk of influencing her decisions. Or any elected officials' decisions for that matter. It's widely accepted that there have to be limitations on what kind of gifts can an elected official accept. Because let's say that I'm a guy who maybe wants to, maybe get into, healthcare. And there's some things that I'd like to do in the healthcare space. If I'm able to throw down huge, expensive gifts without limit, there's a very good chance that I'm going to be able to influence the decisions of the people who make those decisions. And so there should be guardrails in place to ensure that politicians are making decisions in the best interests of their constituents, in the best interests of the electorate. And if you don't have these sorts of rules in place, you lose those guardrails. The expression absolute power corrupts absolutely exists for a reason. The more power, the more opulence that people are able to get, the more that's going to be part of their drive. These changes and we're only halfway through Bill 8, by the way. These changes to the Conflict of Interest Act and the donations and the gifts means that the politicians who are in power get to decide without any debate in the legislature, without any public discussion, how much they think they should be able to receive as gifts. And given the tone and tenor of Danielle Smith's conversation with Mr. Jesperson, it's pretty clear. She thinks that she'll be able to do pretty much whatever she wants to, damn the consequences. It's incredibly disingenuous for her to be like, oh, I was just volunteering to wash some dishes, and leave out the fact that the restaurant went up for sale shortly, very shortly. Like, people found the listing 24 hours later. Which raises the very valid question, was she using her profile and her official government Twitter account to emphasize, hey, I own this restaurant, the Premier owns this restaurant, and it's up for sale. Boy, I'd sure like to sell this restaurant. I sure would be grateful to anyone who bought this restaurant. Is there room for a conflict of interest there? Of course there is. A grade 6 student could tell you that. But Danielle Smith, she feels like she should be able to do basically whatever the hell she wants without consequence. And this is where we move into the other deeply horrifying, deeply disturbing part of Bill 8. Because the other thing that Bill 8 does is it makes major changes to how investigations can occur during elections. Some of you might remember during the last provincial election that we had, there's a little bit of a shitstorm that went on because Danielle Smith was being investigated by the ethics commissioner to determine whether or not she tried to interfere in the administration of justice and whether or not she had engaged in behaviors that were corrosive to the foundations of democracy. Now, it's important to highlight that came out not because the ethics commissioner released it. That came out because Danielle Smith offered that information up herself. The ethics commissioner can't actually comment on whether or not there is an investigation and what's going on with that investigation. When the ethics commissioner finishes her report, it goes up on the website, and then it gets kicked over to the Speaker of the House. And then the Speaker of the House decides what they're going to do with it. But the ethics commissioner can't just release information willy-nilly. She can, though, release those reports when they're completed, and she can, though, conduct those investigations. This changes all of that. So when we take a look at what the actual legislation says, what it says is, going forward, once the writ is dropped, there can be no investigations that are started. Once the writ is dropped, any investigations that are going on have to be paused. Once the writ is dropped, no reports can be released. So what this means is that for all intents and purposes, once a politician decides to say, hey, you know what, we're going to have us an election, they put a gag order on the ethics commissioner. Now, of course, this comes on the heels of the news that the government of Alberta has said, hey, ethics commissioners, your contract's up in like a couple of months. It's actually the chief elections, the chief electoral officer, Glenn Ressler, and the ethics commissioner, Marguerite Trussler, who have been told by the government, hey, you know, your contract's up. Thanks for your service. We're going to find some new folks. So they're getting rid of the ethics commissioner who found that Danielle Smith did violate the Ethics Act, the Conflict of Interest Act. They're getting rid of the ethics commissioner who did say that Danielle Smith's behavior was corrosive to the foundations of democracy. And they're getting rid of the chief electoral officer who brought in a lot of the reforms that we've seen in regards to voting. Now, this includes some electronic voting. This also includes electronic tabulators. And this includes a lot of the early voting. These are all things that were brought in under Glenn Ressler's watch. So Danielle Smith is replacing, not only is she creating new legislation to say, hey, the ethics commissioner can't do anything during an election, but she's getting rid of the person who's in the job who criticized her. And somehow we're supposed to believe that she's not going to be influenced by gifts. She's not going to be influenced by owner's boxes when she said herself she wants to respect the position, but. And as we talked about in our last episode, in any given conversation, as soon as somebody says, you know what, I really, really like that restaurant, but everything that comes before the but is invalid. It doesn't matter. Because what you're going to say next is going to completely denigrate the first thing that you were talking about. So Danielle Smith doesn't really seem like she wants to respect the position. It doesn't really seem like she wants to hold herself to the higher standards. And it's important to remember when we're talking about the context in which to take this legislation and these decisions. It's important to remember when you compare the things that Danielle Smith has done since she became premier with the things that she railed against when Redford was premier, it's pretty wild. She's taken it way farther. And it's pretty stunning to watch. All of the people who said, oh, got to get rid of Crooked Kenny. And I'm no Kenny fan. Anybody who follows the show knows that. But we got to get rid of Crooked Kenny. Because we got to restore ethics. We got to restore rule of law. We got to protect freedoms. We got to get rid of politicians who are only out for it themselves. And we have here a politician who is out for herself way more than any politician in recent memory. And the voices that are screaming about accountability are utterly silent on these issues. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the biggest story of the week. Oh, sorry. Before we talk about the biggest story of the week, I do have to talk about the two NDP bills that are inevitably going to get squashed. The first one is Bill 202, which is it's called the Education Class Size and Composition Amendment Act. Basically, it's making the argument that, hey, we maybe should be paying attention to class sizes. That's going to get squished pretty quick. And Bill 203, a creation of a committee to recognize foreign credentials faster. Sorry, that one is not an NDP bill, and that one may actually get through. Now we start to talk about Alberta Health Services. And this is probably where I need to throw the caveat on. I am not speaking for anyone other than myself and a couple of people that work on the show. So take that into context. On November the 7th, the day of the leak, this was a pretty wild day because the first one out of the gates to announce that they had received an email were the NDP, and they talked about an email that they received that detailed the government's new plans for reshaping Alberta Health Services. And that email moved around quite a bit. Within like 10, 15 minutes of the NDP making that announcement, we got multiple copies of it in our inbox as well. We tweeted the whole thing out because nobody was doing that for some reason. So we released the whole thing that we were sent, and it turns out it was exactly right, because one of the things that a lot of people were concerned about is not only was this a massive restructuring of about Alberta Health Services, it was a massive restructuring around how healthcare is delivered in the province of Alberta, and it set the stage to sell off a bunch of different things, but also to bring in many more private contractors. And we saw the announcement came the next day, where sure enough, the press conference confirmed absolutely everything that was in that document is accurate. And we are making these very big changes to how healthcare is delivered in the province of Alberta. Now, there were a lot of questions that came up. We're going to talk about some of them. But one of the biggest questions that was asked is, does this mean privatization? And it's fascinating to listen to health. It hurts every time I say this. It's like, it just right there. Health Minister Adriana LaGrange. It's worth listening to what her response was.
So the system, like in the acute care pillar of this new system, would there be room for a competitor to Alberta Health Services to operate?
Well, currently there are a number of service providers, including Covenant Health, as well as Alberta Health Services have been operating in the acute care space. We've also had chartered surgical facilities run by physicians that have been operating for decades now, and we're seeing more of that happening. So it really is ensuring that those that are providing service right now continue to provide service, but they will have an organizational structure overseeing them that really is focused on all of acute care and providing good guidance up to the ministry.
Just to clarify on that first question, I'm really talking about hospitals specifically. So I know there's AHS, there's Covenant. Is there room for more, basically, for their competitive kind of control of hospitals?
Acute care right now is being provided by AHS, by Covenant Health, by chartered surgical facilities. So it will continue to be publicly funded health care right across this province. And so there is no privatization of healthcare. So I want to be very, very clear on that. No privatization. It is publicly funded public healthcare that we're talking about.
Now, there's a little bit of wordplay that's going on there, and it's really important to listen to what's being said and how it's being said. Adriana LaGrange is very clear. It's not privatization. It's not privatization. We're not privatizing anything. We're just using private contractors. Now, this is where the language gets to be really important, because a lot of people don't have a very clear definition about what privatization means. When we're talking about privatization in healthcare, what most people picture is the American model of healthcare, where there is little to no coverage unless you have insurance. There's no public healthcare. Everything is done on a private, you pay for it model. If you have insurance, the insurance pays for varying amounts depending on the quality of the insurance. That's what a lot of people interpret to mean privatization. But what's actually happening is the expansion of the role of private contractors in the healthcare system. And the language that's used is very, very clear. She talks about, well, we've got these service providers who contract, who are doing the work of the public healthcare system. And she gives a couple of examples where she talks about, hey, you know what? We've got these it's a public system. It's not going to be privatized. We're just using private organizations. And the reality is when you start to introduce private for-profit operators, even though they're not necessarily charging extra fees, when they're getting paid out of the public purse and they're responsible for making a profit, something's got to give. And we see this over and over again. And there's some really heartbreaking examples that exist in the continuing care space or in the long-term care space, where private providers who are operating on their own but contracting to a greater service cut all kinds of corners. But this isn't just about the long-term care. This is about a whole lot more than that. And that's where understanding what the system, what it's going to look like, gets to be really, really important. So historically, Alberta Health Services was largely responsible for providing healthcare, administering healthcare in the province of Alberta. Now, this is something that Danielle Smith has made it very clear for a very long time she doesn't like. She doesn't want that to happen. She believes in competition. She believes the more players that you have, the smoother things go. Heck, just look at Dynalife. So what's happened is they've said there's going to be 4 pillars of healthcare in the province of Alberta. There's going to be primary care, there's going to be acute care, there's going to be continuing care, and there's going to be mental health and addiction. They're all going to be separate organizations. Disaggregating, as Danielle Smith likes to say. What does that organization actually look like? Well, it gives the government way more control than they currently have. AHS, Alberta Health Services, is designed to be an arm's length organization so that elected officials can't dictate healthcare decisions because most elected officials aren't healthcare experts. This changes all of that. So now the Minister of Health and the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction will be directly responsible for running their respective areas. So the Minister of Health will be running the primary care organization, the acute care organization, the continuing care organization. And the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction will be responsible for running mental health and addictions organization in the province of Alberta. They will have direct control over each of those things. Now, they work coordinatively with each other and with an integration council. But at the end of the day, this gives the government way more control over policy decisions, which is something that, Danielle Smith was very clear on. Now, that gets us into the question of, well, how is this actually different? And if we take a look from a couple of the slides that were leaked, they know exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly how it's different. Because in the current structure, the Minister of Health and the ministry operate through Alberta Health, and Alberta Health Services provides the care for primary care networks. They take care of all of the services that exist through there. They take care of they're responsible for other acute care providers. So they oversee things like Covenant or those chartered surgical facilities. They also take care of other areas, including mental health and addictions. There's a lot of people who argue that's a really good thing because if somebody goes to the emergency room and they're experiencing a psychological crisis, the emergency room can say, hey, we're going to refer you to this clinic. This is an AHS clinic. And, you can go there and you can start getting some help for the psychological things. This changes that. And in fact, when we look at the new flow chart, the reorganized healthcare system, it makes it very, very clear who's doing the oversight. It also makes one thing extraordinarily clear, and that's that under this new model, AHS is considered to be a service provider with other service providers like Covenant Care. Now, it's easy to look at this and go, well, yeah, but, there's no reason to think that this is the deployment of a model that's been in the works for years. This is the deployment of a model that Danielle Smith has personally advocated for. It's not like there's, recorded video of her saying these things were going to happen in 2021.
System comprehensive now? Of course it isn't. It pays for hospital services and it pays for doctor services, and pretty well everything else can be paid for under a health spending account. That is the way that we can absolutely transform the way our healthcare system works. And it would only cost $1.5 billion. So here's the plan. Just establish a health spending account with $350 for every single Albertan and tell them your employer can match it. You can match it. You can put money in tax-free. You can gift it to a friend or family member. If you don't need it, you want to set up a charity because you know that there are others who need more serious care, you can contribute it to, you can transfer it between different accounts. It would only cost $1.5 billion, and I guarantee you it would absolutely change the relationship between the doctor and the patient. It would restore that relationship and would take the college out as the intermediary, take Alberta Health Services out as the intermediary, and we would see a proliferation of the kind of clinics that I was talking about, and the kind of telehealth services and the kind of surgical services I was talking about just a minute ago. You need to give people the means to spend their own money on these types of services. Otherwise, and we've seen it, otherwise people will just sit and they'll wait.
She doesn't like the idea that people are just getting to access healthcare, public healthcare, publicly delivered. That doesn't seem like an idea that she's a big fan of. And the health spending accounts is an idea that she's talked about for a very, very long time. And she wants to use those health spending accounts, which we haven't seen introduced in the province of Alberta yet. But it's not like with all of that, it's not like there's video of Smith describing the implementation of this new model of the healthcare system. She's just talking about health spending accounts and the need to move AHS out of the position that they're in. It's not like there's a video that exists where she says, here's what we need to do. We need to set up the environment so that we can have all of these service providers, and AHS can just be a service provider, and then we can bring in new people. It's not like that's a thing, is it?
You give money to Alberta Health Insurance. It's a separate entity. It's a government entity, so it's publicly administered. They are forbidden from running any programs or any hospitals themselves. Alberta Health Services becomes the contractor. Sure, we can grandfather in their contracts for now, but then we would have the Alberta Health Quality Council do us an auditor function and tell us whether or not Alberta Health Services should continue running the Lougheed Hospital, or the Rocky View Hospital, or South Campus, or any of the 100 hospitals that they currently run in majority in the province. And if they can't meet the terms that we want them to, we can do an RFP. And then the Alberta Health Insurance can give a different contract to a different group of doctors and a different group of patients and a different entity to run all of our hospitals. That is completely compliant with the Canada Health Act. It's a structure issue. And it's a political will issue. And we've got neither of those, unfortunately, because I've presented this to the health minister and they did not act on it.
And she absolutely did present it to the health minister. When Danielle Smith was a lobbyist for the Alberta Enterprise Group, she absolutely is on record having lobbied the health minister to pursue exactly these things. But if you really need to see it, all you have to do is recognize that she's done a little bit of a branding exercise. So what she referred to in the video there was an Alberta Health Insurance group. Well, if you take a look at the flow chart for how AHS and how healthcare is going to be designed in the province of Alberta, how it's going to be administered in the province of Alberta, there's a body called the Integration Council. that does exactly what Danielle Smith described in that video and fulfills exactly the role in the flow chart, the org chart, that she describes in that video. So let's be very, very clear here. This is not just a restructuring. This is a very calculated and deliberate move to crack open how healthcare has been administered in the province of Alberta, to take away the ability to have consistency and a publicly funded, non-profit healthcare system. This is a way to introduce other contractors. And if we don't like how Alberta Health Services is running the Lougheed Hospital, well, then we can just issue an RFP. And because it's the organization that's administering on the government property, she's right. It is compliant with the Canada Health Act. But what it does is it opens the door for private contractors, for-profit contractors, to not just work in spaces like cafeteria food or spaces like laundry. We're talking about direct delivery of patient care. Now, in order to make sure that we're not getting all of this wrong, this is where I'm going to plug the next episode that we have coming up here before we get into the Stuff Danny Says segment of the show. We're sitting down with somebody who actually understands the legal implications of all of these things. We've had Dr. Lorian Hardcastle on the show before. She's a professor of health law. She knows her stuff. And we're having her on again. That episode's going to be going live for our Patreon sponsors on Monday. You know, as always, you get a little bit of the early access. That's what comes with the warm fuzzies of supporting the show. But also, it will be going live to all of our audiences on Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock. And it's a critically important conversation, because Dr. Hardcastle does a very good job of not only addressing the implications for the ethics piece, but she also does an incredibly good job of addressing the implications for the changes, the structural changes that we're seeing Danny implement with the changes to how healthcare is being administered in the province of Alberta. We got a little bit of a special treat for you tonight coming up in just a couple minutes. We're going to have on a little mini guest. It's not going to be like a full long form interview, but we've got a little mini guest coming to do a bit of an update on some things. But before we do that, we got a couple clips, fun clips that we got to play, because God, that was a dirge of a show so far, wasn't it? So first of all, time for the intro. I'm never going to get tired of that. We got two clips that we got to play this week because, I mean, as you'll see, Danny kept her time in front of the microphone a little short this week. Perhaps she's saving it up for next week's episode of Your Province, Your Premier. We had this week, obviously was missed because normally it airs at 10 o'clock, and she had some places to be, being the Premier. It's almost as if she has some functions that she needs to fulfill as Premier. There's some decorum that's required from the office of Premier, just not when Tucker Carlson's in town. But she did have a couple of other speaking engagements that we wanted to highlight. One of them was for the Rural Municipalities Conference, where she was talking about Justin Trudeau's changes to heating oil. And it gave a pretty stunning glimpse into how Danny does her research.
Was special treatment for some parts of Eastern Canada on the carbon tax. Now, we are glad. I want to know, I've heard that there's 300 heating oil installations in Alberta. Does anyone have heating oil in your municipality? Oh, over here. I'm going to talk to you afterwards. Anyone else? Okay, I need to find out all about that because I think it's only 300. But we are glad that some of our fellow Canadians, mostly in Atlantic Canada, get to keep a little bit more in their pocketbooks. But Ottawa's not contemplating any relief for the rest of the country, Alberta included.
I just love the let's pull the room to make major policy decisions when you can't even see past the stage lights. But my favorite clip from Danny this week has to be from the press conference for the implosion of Alberta Health Services and the restructuring of how healthcare is going to work and how we're going to introduce all of these private contractors, because the press conference wasn't over. This is really important to highlight. The press conference wasn't over. And this happened. Now, we've edited the video. We haven't edited the audio. We just reframed it a little bit so you can see. We still don't know what happened that drove this little thing that you're going to see here in a sec. Apparently, it was quite horrifying, as per Dan Williams' expression. But near the end of the press conference, before the press conference was over, Danny just left.
That for every single individual in this province. And so that's what we're working towards, is really improving the system so we catch things early and help people stay as healthy as possible and stay out of the hospital.
And we have time for just one more question here. Operator, could you put through our last caller, please?
I would love to know, because not only is Dan obviously quite uncomfortable with ever played out there, but the gentleman standing to him is doing a very good job of, what the hell was that? Oh, look away. So it's those are our two clips for. We should, if that feels like a sponsored segment. I know it does, but we don't do sponsored segments. And I'm sure that we're going to get dinged on copyright for that music at some point. But so far, we've gotten away with it. Now, all of that being said, before we get to our open mic, a little while ago, we had this gentleman on the show, and we were talking about a new initiative to make sure that Albertans had access to unbiased, accurate information on the issues that are facing the province. And here to provide us a little bit of an update on the Citizens Research Forum is none other than the incomparable, real David Gray.
My friend, Nate Pike, how are you doing?
I love how that's right. You're writing. You know what? I'm a little bit. I've been busy, so I might have missed it. But have you been on the number one podcast yet? Have you hit that since our conversation?
I have been busy too, and no, it's getting more national press than local yet. Look, once we make it in the U.S., we'll be fine.
There we go. So, I mean, you could make, I suppose, the argument that the breakdown was your springboard past that particular.
You're my inspiration there, Nate. To be honest, I mean, no, you've got a very engaged group of people. You're doing, the right thing of trying to uncover the sort of. I mean, the incompetency is the easy stuff to find. And I can tell you, because I'm preparing, for tomorrow's speech. I know this is actually going to come on after that, but we're taking.
Oh no, this is live tonight, man.
Oh, is it live tonight? Okay, well then tomorrow.
You are live to the interwebs as we're speaking.
Okay, I misunderstood. Well, I am fine with that. And then tomorrow,
no pressure.
I will be talking about what it is we're trying to do, and I can tell you my motivation is I know this government, I know them to be grossly mischaracterizing their role in high prices in Alberta and filling people with misinformation that they confront me with every damn day. And I've been pounding on this pretty much continuously since the election with 2 words: economic withholding. Economic withholding. It's all I talk about because it's a very technique that they use to, turn things into slogans, right? Just transition. You look at information warfare as it applies to the internet, and if it's more than 2 words, you're down by 50%. So even with that intense push, I would bet you no more than 5% or 10% of Albertans know what economic withholding is, and why it's so nefarious and why it's directly attributable to these guys. And I believe in my heart of hearts that if people understood things the way that I understand and other experts understand them, they would be just as mad as I am. And so that's what our goal is. Our goal is to, in every area of things affected by government, get to the point of every guy has ready access to unbiased information that gets you to a point of understanding of what the key issues are and what the key concepts underlying, and sometimes what the definitions of things are. Like, you can't talk about energy if you don't know what a kilowatt hour is. So what's a kilowatt hour? And if we set that as a goal, we can be just very, very, very useful, right? It's all about making it easy for the ordinary person to get good information and stop there. We're not going to tell them, what side of the issue to land on. I think what we'll just do is ask them to rate, positions and arguments and the evidence for them, on a sort of scale of 1 to 10 or +5 to -5, if you like it or don't like it, something like that, right? It's an excellent opportunity for there to be a feedback loop between, the ideas around how are we going to do things and, people's opinion of them, which is very useful. Very
Yeah,
useful.
I think I want to just jump in to highlight here for a quick sec for anybody who's not familiar with you and your body of work, and who it might just be, if they're watching the video of this, going like, who let Grandpa into the recording studio? You're more than a guy who owns a few guitars. You were instrumental in the Wild Rose Party, particularly around the days that Danielle Smith was doing her dedicated and principled, I guess, floor crossing.
Yeah, I was there for that. That was fun. Well,
Yeah,
not fun.
yeah, and you're also
Interesting.
an energy expert. So you're not just somebody who's like, I read this article on the internet. When it comes to the field of energy generation and electricity, you've got an extensive background. You know the things.
Yeah, I do. I've been looking at this stuff for 32 years in total, since 1998 in Alberta, which is really when things all started. So I've been here since the beginning of deregulation, effectively, and in the thick of it, as the leader of first regulatory and then the entire office of the Utility Consumer Advocate. So for about 8 years, I was in every hearing for every utility and every process for every department and agency, burning the midnight oil, reading, 20,000 pages in a week, trying to defend the interests of Alberta consumers in those processes. In all that time, with a considerable amount of effort, we saved ratepayers $470 million of disallowed rate increases, requested rate increases. They're giving that away every 10 days with economic withholding now, and it just ticks me off. It's the greatest it's a travesty. It's the greatest scandal in Alberta energy history. I don't care what kind of energy. I mean, they're throwing $80 billion in 3 years, extra gravy, to Alberta electric companies from every other ratepayer, or every ratepayer in the province, big and small. Like, it's just asinine. And I can't believe that nobody has their guts for garters, and it tells me that we've got a bad and badly fractured information universe in Alberta, and that we better do something about that because people are going to get hoodwinked in every which way.
Yeah, and that's what led you to the creation of the Citizens Research Forum. So talk a little bit about. I mean, you've kind of explained what the goal of the Citizens Research Forum is, but you've got a live event. I'm trying to do my best there.
People are going to think it's trash talk, Nate Pike.
I know. It's a live event with David Gray tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss it. What's the live event?
So the live event is an organization meeting, our first organization meeting. We've got, I don't know, they keep coming in. There's probably over 2,000 people signed up now. You can sign up either as a volunteer or just to monitor, which means it'll probably get you to volunteer later because it's not going to be that hard. At citizensresearchforum.com or .org or .ca. They all work. The basic principle of this thing is that we've set up an industrial wood chipper of truth. We have a process called a steel dog analysis where you don't argue over positions, but what you do is assemble all the very best arguments for any given position and the best evidence for that position of all those that are submitted. And you also find the best counter argument and the best alternatives and their arguments and counter arguments and the evidence those are based on. And that's where you stop. At that point, it's up to each of us as voters to look at what that, condensed amount of material is and decide which options for us, which is the way it should be. But it does eliminate the opportunity for particularly for-profit social media echo chambers to amplify propaganda, agitprop, bullshit, and lies.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important piece because, one of the things that we saw play out, I listened in on the town hall that was going on for the pension this week. I had a couple questions I was going to ask, but in a shocking turn of events, they didn't let me on.
You got to wear a tie, man. Tomorrow I'll have my tie
see,
back on.
but it's like a phone thing, so I thought I could get away with the ball cap. But
they can tell it's the magic rag.
they had there's one lady who called in, and I felt really bad for her because she was talking about how Alberta makes transfer payments, and it was just like, that's not how any of this works. And if that's what you're angry about, you're angry over nothing. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to see what you're going to do with the Citizens Research Forum, because I think the more that we can see people educated as to what the issues actually are, the more robust and informed our democratic discourse is going to be.
If we get to the point where we all can agree on what the numbers are, which should be the easiest part to get to, and then like what's the GDP, what's inflation, there's a base core truth that even the hardest core of sides could probably agree on. And working outwards from there, what we're trying to get to is understanding, right? So a big part of what I'm hoping we attract in volunteers aren't people that are going to write stuff, but people that are going to read stuff and then let the people who are writing it know if it's hitting the mark, if it's helping them. Because that's really, I think, the whole motto that we need to adhere to, which is to be helpful. Now, people are going to say, well, that sounds cool, but sounds boring. We're going to do something else too. It's a question of once you got to do one thing, once you've got to organize, thousands of people to help so that you can undertake to get to the truth of what's going on with our government that we're paying so much money for. There's so many things you can do. And the biggest problem we've got is the corrosive effect of for-profit social media amplifying disagreements and bringing people that hate each other together at 1,000,000 miles an hour and without any context. So why don't we just do something different? Nobody says we have to not build our own website that does neat things that are kind of like that, but that are pro-social and help us feel better about ourselves and help us connect with old friends over coffee every day. Or my favorite one, which is connect with a random Canadian. Because here's the thing with what we're building, it's started off as kind of a laboratory of democracy, but all we need to do is kind of add a coffee room to it, and it's a social network. And if it's a fun social network, especially if it's one that's safe for kids and pro-social, not driven by a profit motive, but instead held by a public trust. I mean, one of the conditions that I'm imposing when I transfer the intellectual property from myself and my company to the society is that this thing needs to be held in perpetuity for the public interest by this broad society. And I think that will make all the difference. I think that we can do things that are wonderful and make us richer and happier and better people. And it's just magic. So you have to tune in tomorrow to get all the details, but I'm excited. I really am. I think we've got a tiger by the tail. We've got an idea that wants out in the universe badly. It really does. I'm a little overwhelmed at how much support we're getting. It's
That's
amazing.
awesome. Now, I want to clarify a couple things. So, thing number one, this is at 4 p.m. Mountain Time
Mountain Time
tomorrow,
tomorrow.
Sunday, November 12th.
Yes.
Where do people tune in? Is it on Twitch? I hear that's one of the big streaming platforms. I don't know.
I wouldn't
I
know
just do.
either. I am putting it up on the two that I think I can manage simultaneously, one of which is the Zitter, the other of which is YouTube, both at The Real DK Gray. We are setting up the account, the YouTube account for the society, but we can't get it set up in time to be able to live stream. There's a 24-hour delay. So we'll do it on mine. Actually, if folks don't mind while they're there, subscribe to mine so I can get over 50 so I can live stream with my phone, because that sounds like a lot more fun. And away we go. Let's rock and roll.
There we go. All right. And I want to clarify, because when we did the episode, that was with iteration, I'll call it 1.0 of the website address, and you're now on to iteration 2.0. So if people want to check out the website, and it's I mean, I dug the devil's logos and stuff that you had going on there for the first day. But what's the website that people should be visiting?
The website they should be visiting is citizensresearchforum.com. That one works without fail. And we had an issue. There was one file in a menu at the bottom of a menu at one of the pages on one of the host sites that it was on to start with, when it was me taking it over from my my rockabilly band, the Dirty Devils. And it was, that's probably the most publicity we've had in quite a while. We had to disband the group because our drummer blew his rotator cuff, and it's kind of key to it. So it's kind of like, Rush, the drummer quits. That's it for the band, man. That's it.
I mean, Def Leppard was able to do it, but whatever. I'm going to get comments on that joke. Real quick, David, because I know you can do it, so I'm going to ask you to. We got a couple people in the comments section who are asking some questions. In 30 seconds or less, what is economic withholding?
Economic withholding is the ability of people with enough of the percentage of the dispatchable generation to be able to take some of it, move it to the top of the price stack, which is like $1, so that the rest of it moves up. So it's just like if you were OPEC and held back 2 million barrels a day of oil, the price is going to go up, That's the withholding part. The economic part is they aren't supposed to do it physically. They're supposed to do it financially by raising the prices like that.
And I'm just, what year was it that policy was brought
That
in
was
again?
brought in 2012.
Okay, there we go. All right, David Gray, I'm going to be watching the live stream tomorrow. I'm excited for it. Anything else you want people to hear? Anything else you want to say?
Well, I want to, all the broken down, thanks for all your support. I've seen a lot of you show up in our stuff, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I hope it's the start of a new era in the way things work around here.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat and plug the live special. I hope there will be. I'm going to be honest with you. If you do this live stream and one of those guitars doesn't come down off the wall, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Not saying, just saying.
Yeah, I'm past the days of breaking guitars. So I like the ones I have, and I'm going to keep them.
Well, no, I just think you should. I mean, a little musical intro to start the evening off.
It's funny, right? For whatever reason, people think that if you do music, you can't do anything else. And that's not my experience.
Yeah, no, most of the. I mean, there's a lot of really smart musicians out there.
It's a pretty complicated topic when you get into it, and it stays that way for a long, long time.
The number of PhDs that are just present in like The Offspring is pretty nuts. And if you want to talk math, like I would challenge anybody to listen to Tool and not go, those guys are playing with numbers in a profoundly dangerous way.
My one guitar rig is the only thing I know more complicated than the Alberta electricity system.
Well, we're going to have a conversation about that guitar rig sometime, because I got a couple that I think I could probably beat you
I
with.
could
But
push a button and it changes tuning.
Okay, you win. I can't do that. I can barely tune a guitar on a good day. But David Gray, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Nate,
and I'll be
everybody.
Nate Pike. There we go. David Gray, everybody. All right. Big thanks to David Gray for tuning in tonight and sharing his thoughts. We'll be watching that live stream at 4:00 tomorrow. In the meantime, and in between time, it's time to open up the open mic. We got a couple callers. To my shock, I was actually thinking that because we had moved things a day, that we wouldn't have any of our regular commentators show up, but we do have two. I'm going to bring in Chris first. Chris, what's going on tonight?
Hello, how's it going?
I'm doing fantastic. Are you in a wind tunnel?
No, sorry. Here, give me a second. 2 seconds.
It's all good.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. It just sounded like you were walking and it was southern Alberta where the wind was blowing.
There we go.
Inexplicably.
So sorry. How's this? Is this better?
That's fantastic. What's going on tonight, man?
Hey, so I just had a quick comment and a question for you, actually, if you don't mind.
Sure, I can do my best to answer it, but I'm not very bright, so bear with me.
No worries. Okay, so my comment was, I saw a tweet today that I thought you might be interested in. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Andrew Leach, I'm pretty sure it was him at least. It was a tweet about basically quote tweeting a release from the Alberta government talking about how, we've added a new hydrogen vehicle to our fleet. And he mentions, he includes a screenshot of back from when 2003, when the Bush administration was talking about $1 billion investment in hydrogen.
Yes, I have that tweet in front of me right now.
It's just so funny. It's just the fact that it's like, we're hyping. Not to say that hydrogen isn't a very interesting technology fuel source. It's just I just thought the tweet was really funny and it was something to highlight. And my question for you, if you don't mind me asking, was with everything we're seeing, especially with the Justice Bill, as well as AHS and some other things, it makes me think that there has to, especially with the recent reporting from the Narwhal, where they talk about how much the government is obscuring the FOIP system and not responding to requests and so on. My question to you is, when do you think things tip over into kind of similar to the Trump era, where so much nonsense was happening that eventually everyone just started catching on to it? Like, it wasn't just, oh, he's done something shocking, because that was, I mean, I don't want to say Premier Smith and Trump are the same, but comparisons. So yeah, what do you think that there's going to be a point where it's no longer just, oh, she says something shocking, but there's actual concrete actions that will make people start to kind of like click and say, oh, this isn't just her saying something or doing something outrageous like seeing Tucker Carlson. Now it's actually, oh, she's done something egregious, or the government's done something egregious, and people are going, like, the truth will come out. I'm not saying that there's a truth that will come out. I'm just saying, what do you think is the likelihood of that happening?
Well, I think there's my personal opinion. I mean, first of all, I'll just say that, like, there's a few Twitter accounts that I'm just very, very cautious with, and that we've all sort of agreed on the team here, like, don't mess with Andrew Leach, because he'll destroy you. So yeah. I'm not surprised that he took someone out for a walk, because that seems to be his hobby every couple of hours, is just having the evidence in his Rolodex, and he's able to just, like, boom, you're done. So I'll throw that out there. To your question about, like, is there a tipping point? I think that there's a couple of different ways, historically speaking, that things can play out. I think that, I don't want to use the United States as a model for anything in Canada. I think that the people who are trying to use the model of the United States for things in Canada are the ones who are causing the problems in a lot of big ways. Certainly the importation of people like Tucker Carlson and people like James Lindsay. Those are problems that we don't need here. So, I mean, that's my first sort of gut reaction. But the second piece is, and this kind of goes to what I was talking about with David, is there's two likely turning points. The first one is things get so bad that it starts to affect everyone on a personal level, that they are able to let go of a lot of the misconceptions and misinformation and disinformation. And I've seen that happen, especially in regards to healthcare, where people have said, oh, I thought the healthcare system was fine until I had to, get an appendectomy, or until I had to call an ambulance. And then, holy hell, what's going on here? This is unacceptable. So that's one of the ways that people tend to get activated from a political standpoint. I think the other one, and this is sort of the one that I hope for, because I don't want to see people suffer. I don't want to see people have to experience crisis in order to realize how bad things are. And this is where I'm excited for what David's doing. I think the more that we can have conversations with people and convey to them in effective ways and disarm some of that mis and disinformation that's out there, that's how we're going to get them de-escalated. Like, I saw there were a couple people who tagged the show this week, where they were like, oh, the breakdown, they keep pointing out all the problems and they don't talk about the solutions. And I disagree with that characterization, quite frankly. I think that we end the show. I make the conscious choice to end the show with the first step that everybody needs to be taking in order to address any of these issues. You have to engage in conversation with people. You have to keep that conversation going, because if it's just an issue of, oh, that guy said a dumb thing, so I'm going to explain to him why it's a dumb thing and why he's a dumb person for believing it, you've lost that person. They're just going to get entrenched, and there's nothing that you can do. But when you're able to have conversations with people and say to them, here's my understanding of things, here's how I believe this works, I would appreciate it if if you don't want to believe me, that's cool, because we have diametrically opposed views, and naturally there's going to be some resistance to that. But do me a favor and at least look it up, and look it up using good sources. Like, you can use I hate that Wikipedia is a good source, but you can use Wikipedia if you want to. If you want to understand how equalization works, then please look it up and come back to me. And if I'm wrong, then I'll own it. I don't have a problem with that. And if what you've been told, and I think the framing is really important because, everybody likes to see somebody else be wrong, but not many people like to be wrong themselves. I find I'm one of those weird people where if I'm wrong about something, I just go, "Oh, cool, I learned a thing," and I go about my day. It doesn't have like any major impact on my ego, but a lot of people it really, really does. And so when I'm asking somebody to do something like that, the way that I'll do it is I'll say, "And if you've been misinformed, if somebody's told you something that's false, please let me know." Because it seems like there's a lot of people who believe this thing, and it's contrary to what I believe. It's contrary to what I've read, what I've been taught, what I know to be true. So if you've been misinformed, please let me know because I want to know how to fix these things because that's the only way that things are going to get better. And having those non-confrontational conversations is absolutely critical. Because when you have those non-confrontational conversations, when you have those conversations with people where it is a conversation, it's not a boxing match, that's what changes people's minds. That's what makes people open to new ideas. And as much as there's this rhetoric that exists on the Twitter, the zitter, as Dave calls it. I still haven't been able to let go of Twitter. I'm trying so hard.
I know, me too.
It's hard, but as much as there is that sort of pugilistic approach to things where like, no, you're wrong. And because I know how wrong you are, I'm just going to beat you over the head with how wrong you are. And then I'm just going to walk away because screw you for being wrong. There's good.
So, sorry.
I was just going to say there's good faith conversations, there's bad faith conversations. And if somebody is interested in having a good faith conversation, those are the people that I look for. If somebody's just having a bad faith conversation, I got better things to do with my time.
And I've been kind of thinking about that a little bit myself, especially over the past week. And I kind of want to ask one more quick question, and then I'll be good for the night. Obviously, we agree that we don't want things to get so bad that that's what makes people wake up. We want people to learn to have the facts first. My question is, obviously, David Gray has a really cool idea, like really interesting approach that I'm excited to see develop further. How much of a role do you think? I mean, in some ways you're doing this yourself, but how much do you think a role would play in starting or in holding the conversation if we, I don't want to say framed it in an entertainment way, but I think of things like the Daily Show. I think of other, types of things where they talk about real issues, but in a way that's entertaining or funny. And I wonder if maybe that's something that we're lacking in Canadian conversations.
Oh, we for sure are. I mean, our Patreon supporters will know something's coming that I'm really excited for. But there's no question. There's a reason why we do some of the sketches that we do. There's a reason why we introduced our Stuff Danny Says segment and have the music and the things. And it's because I agree with you 100%, but I also think that it's really, really important to it's a really hard line to walk, man. Like, in all honesty, we do, and I've said this in many places before, what we try to do here is well-informed satire. And it is a really difficult line to walk between doing satire and getting dragged into the serious side of things always. And, I always like to say when we, I'll use the leak of the AHS deck. We got that, and we absolutely turned around and released that publicly because we're not journalists. That's not what we're trying to do. And
right.
The more informed people are, the more access that they have to the raw information, the better things will be. And I didn't see any other I don't know what the word would be because I don't know what we are, media group.
You were the first person I saw who actually posted a physical copy of these documents.
Yeah,
and
I haven't
and
seen
I don't
anyone
want to
do
say
it.
I knew you were like I had a suspicion that that if I was going to see these, it was going to be from your account. But
that's the thing is that we don't want to have the focus being solely on, oh, we're going to be deadly serious all the time, because that's not
right.
fun. I mean, the shirt that I'm wearing tonight is active satire.
Can I buy it?
There's only two in existence.
Damn it! That was my only other question I was going to ask because I love that shirt so much.
Do you know the story? I'll tell the story if you don't know it. Do you know the story behind the shirt?
I don't. Please tell me.
I'll tell you the story behind the shirt. And it's a best way, it's a really effective way to sort of encapsulate the ethos of what we're trying to do here. A couple years ago, there was this dude named Matt Wolf. And he had a very adversarial approach to his social media. He did some very questionable things, I think is probably the most diplomatic way that I can say it. I think personally posting any pictures of people's kids is a very bad thing to do. But without getting to a huge history lesson, we regularly got into sparring matches with Matt Wolf because he was one of the figures that Jason Kenney, he was the chief issues manager, I think was his title. It was one of the figures that Jason Kenney had deployed to like go be my attack dog on the social media spaces.
Okay.
And we had, I don't even remember what the thing was, but we'd done a thing where we kind of found a thing and there was it had legs. It was real. And so we threw it out to the ether, and Matt Wolf responded by saying, "Oh, look, the AB Ledge hall monitors are at it again." And so he was trying to, insult us and infantilize us a little bit. And my immediate reaction when I saw that was like, "Oh, that's turning into a shirt. That's
That is literally
100% turning into a shirt." Because it's an effective way to be like, "Hey, you know what? I don't think I'm the official AB Ledge hallway monitor, but having the chief issues manager to the office of the premier call me that, I'll wear that like a badge. I will." So but that's the thing, is that you have to take the serious stuff and find a way to have a little bit of fun with it, because otherwise it just turns into a dirge. It just turns into everything's awful always, all of the time, everywhere, and it's not. I think that there's such an important role of humor and joy and all of those things in the universe, and you have to lean into those, because otherwise you're just left with despair. And I think that there's way too much good things in the world to not. I would love to have, for the record, if I could get, we've got like a couple people that help write jokes for the show, and some of the sketches for the show. But if I could get like a writer's room of funny people, oh, I'd be on that like white on rice.
I volunteer because honestly, I have ideas. I've been thinking anyway. But my last super quick comment I was going to say was to your point of we need humor, we need light. Really, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I actually saw I was taking the new Edmonton train today, the new Valley Line train, and there's a mural at one of the stops which talks about when you see only darkness, you have to realize the light's coming from you, and that's how everyone else is seeing the light. And so there has to be a sense of us putting some form of good into the world on our own accord.
Absolutely. I agree. I love that. Graffiti and murals have some of the best wisdom. I got a t-shirt. I haven't worn it in a long time because it was like, it's probably 20 years old. Dating myself a little bit there, but it was a graffiti that I saw across from the apartment that I used to live in, and it was just resonated with me, and it was, they want you docile, not dead. And that was just like, oh, I'm putting that on a shirt because I'm an aging punk rocker. That's the kind of stuff that we buy into. But yeah, no, there's so much. I'll put it this way. Let me put it this way. If I didn't think that there were good things in the world that were worth standing up for, I wouldn't be here.
I hear that. And thanks again, Nate.
Yeah, thank you, man. We've got Cassandra in here as well. We'll bring her on as a speaker next. I think that's everybody who's in the queue. It's a little bit of a smaller spaces, probably because we moved the time. But Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Well, I first want to say that I'm glad you had Mr. Gray on. I signed up for the Citizens Research Forum. I have not yet signed up to volunteer, only because of my own personal housing crisis that I'm going through. But I do plan to once I'm in a better place, and I'm very excited. I love the idea. I think there's way too much misinformation. And I, unfortunately and admittedly, have found myself digressing into anger at times at just the level of buy-in to some of the misinformation. And so I'm really happy that he's doing this, and I'm really excited to hopefully get settled and be a bigger part of and volunteer with it as well.
Awesome.
So I wanted to say that. But I was also wanted to make a comment about, and it kind of relates to my situation, but it also relates to, we were talking about that town hall where they were arguing with callers and gaslighting them, basically. And I just wanted to say, when Jason Kenney's the leader of the UCP and premier, if you called into a minister's office with an issue, they would still do casework and try to solve the issue.
Yep.
But now when you call in, basically the way it is, it's like it was at the town hall. They will, like when I called into Nixon's office, and I'm telling this person directly in his office, because that's who I asked to call, and they were essentially arguing and telling me that I'm telling them my own personal experience, and they're telling me that what I'm experiencing isn't happening, isn't true. And then gaslighting me and yelling over me and throwing numbers at me and that they're supposedly but none of them solve the issue, right?
Yeah.
And so it, I found it cynically funny when I heard about the town hall and how it was described, because that is exactly what it's like if anybody has ever tried to call into any minister's office and tried to just impart some, like, I'm a constituent and I would like you to listen to me kind of conversation. That's exactly how they treat you now under Danielle Smith. So it didn't surprise me all that much. Let me just say that this is their tactic. They're not interested in actually hearing what Albertans to say. They want to tell everybody what they think Albertans want, but they don't actually want to listen to what Albertans want. They want to tell us what we should be believing and listening to.
Oh, 100%.
And I've never seen anything so blatant. Like I said, like I've never had an issue calling up a minister's office, even if it's somebody I'm politically polar opposite to. And I had a great relationship with the ladies in Jason Kenney's office. They were wonderful. They listened, they tried to help you out the best they can, but now that's all gone. That doesn't happen. These people don't care. They just want to gaslight you. And if they can avoid talking to you at all, they will. And it's really sad because, they got elected to serve us.
100%. And that's, boy, you hit the nail on the head there, because to me, the one of the biggest issues, and this is the greatest tragedy, I think, of what Danielle Smith is doing with the Conflict of Interest Act and allowing for, you can have all of the gifts of all of the money, all of the cars, the toys,
Come
the
on
things,
and bribe
whatever.
me. Like, can I say it any louder?
Yeah. But like the the great tragedy of that is government elected officials are supposed to be there in service roles. You are supposed to run for government because you want to serve your community. Now, I'm not saying for a second that that happens consistently or reliably, because God knows it doesn't. We've got a lot of self-serving people in there.
No,
But these
it's just yeah,
changes
it's
are only going to attract more people who are self-serving and cause the people who are already self-serving to be even more self-serving.
well, and I am, obviously I'm left leaning. And when I first moved to this province, I didn't talk about politics for the longest time because I just couldn't and one day I walked in and I heard an older gentleman and a young man talking in the place I used to go get my coffee and breakfast before going up to my office. And, the conversation was such a breath of fresh air. I had to go over and talk to them, and it turned out that the older gentleman, who was educating this younger gentleman, was actually a former Speaker of the House.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember his name for the life of me. And I had the most wonderful, it was an amazing conversation. And of course, we're different ends of the political spectrum, but, it was this idea that he said the majority of people want to get elected, that run for office, the majority of them, they really do want to help. They think they have the best ideas that can make our society better. That doesn't say that all of them, it's just the majority. Unfortunately, with this current government in power, that does not seem to be the case. It seems to be the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because, we can, I've always had friends all over the political spectrum, and we used to have conversations. We used to sit down, we'd debate. Sometimes we'd get passionate. We'd have fist slamming on tables, but we weren't angry. We weren't angry at each other. We were debating our ideas and pushing and pulling and, hashing it out, and we were learning from each other. And, I'm going to say it probably happened, unfortunately, the temperature south of the border had an effect on that, because that was the first time when that person was running for office down there. That was the first time where all of a sudden all these people were on different ends of the political spectrum, that we would have these passionate debates and conversations about issues. All of a sudden that couldn't happen anymore. It was like it went from a passionate debate to, you don't agree with me, so I hate you now, bye bye. And relationships ended, and it was really sad, and families were even torn apart. And I really hope that we can come back to a place where we can, I think we are. I am starting to have more of those conversations with more people.
That's good.
Again, but it's a scary thing when that stops happening, right? Because when a society becomes so polarized that you can't even have a conversation, like that's just, anyway, that's my take on it all.
No, thank you. And I agree with you 100%. I think that, this is, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier. It's all about being able to have conversations. So thanks for weighing in tonight.
Hey, anytime. I love Wayne, and I love that, Nate, I've never been a big listen to podcasts until I started listening to The Breakdown.
Aw.
No, it's true. I've become hooked, and it's because, it's back to the fact of the conversation, that there's real conversations going on about real things that are happening, and it's not polarizing. It's just talking.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And I just want to say I appreciate you for it.
No, thank you so much, Cassandra. I appreciate that a lot.
No problem.
All right.
Have a good night.
You as well. Okay, so I think that clears out our speakers list. I know there's probably going to be a couple of people who are logging in tomorrow going like, what the hell's going on here? I thought the breakdown was supposed to be on. But we will be back next Sunday at our regular time of 8 o'clock. We just had to move things for this week because reasons. So there's that. We will be back on Sunday. I want to say it again. We have the conversation coming up with Dr. Lorian Hardcastle about the legality of all of these changes that are being made. It's an incredible conversation. It's going to be available for our Patreon sponsors first thing on Monday. And it'll be going live on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Speaking of the Patreon, he said, because this is the part where I'm supposed to plug that. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, whether it's the interviews or the live shows or the one of the best ways that you can support us is by signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just couple bucks a month, you can help us continue to do all the FOIP requests, continue to buy the materials for the things that we're working on, and our Patreon sponsors know what I'm talking about. So, you get early access to all of our interview episodes, and that's totally a thing that's worth doing. Plus, you can tell your favorite politician that you don't like, hey, I just thought you should know I'm supporting The Breakdown, and odds are that will probably drive them, potentially on both sides of the aisle, a little bit nuts. So you get that added bonus as well. But if you aren't somebody who has the means to do that, we totally appreciate that. Like, share, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. But I wanna plug one other little thing before we go tonight, because we do have the merch. Christmas is coming. You've probably got family members that would love a confusing, lacking context gift from The Breakdown. We've got the hoodies that are super warm. We've got the coffee cups, and I know I say this every episode, but I do regularly have my morning coffee with my Breakdown coffee cup. I absolutely love it. When the good folks at AB Poly said, hey, we should do another merch line, I was like, well, we got to do the coffee cups, because I love my little coffee cup. But we also have the t-shirts. There's a lot to unpack there. Keep the conversation going. And most importantly, we also have the limited edition cuffed beanies, or the cuffed toques, with all of the profits going to help that lady who was just speaking there, Cassandra, as she navigates the housing crisis in a very real way, in very real time. All of these things you can pick up at abpoly.ca, and big thanks again to the folks at abpoly.ca for partnering with us on all of that stuff. I think that's it. We managed to clock this win under the 2 hour mark. We'll be happy if we go to 3 hours again next Sunday. But I want to just say it again, because it did kind of push a bit of a button in me. When people were tagging us and being like, oh, they never offer solutions. The solutions start by having the conversations. It's so critical. And the conversations aren't about showing that you're right. It's about showing someone else and being open to learning yourself where the bullshit is. And that's absolutely critical. And if we aren't willing to have those conversations, there's no other solutions that'll work. There's a lot of things that are going on in the province right now that are, quite frankly, scary. And that's not likely going to change anytime in the next 3 years. But in that meantime and in between time, in the same way that polling causes pressure on politicians, even though there's not an election coming, those polling numbers can get changed by conversations. And when enough people start to show up, whether it's at a protest or a rally or any of the other things that happen, those are the pressures that make politicians change their mind. And if there's one thing that we should be extraordinarily confident of, is that we have a premier who bows to public pressure, because she was terrified of Arthur Pawlowski. And she was so terrified of getting caught in a situation like that again, she has literally changed the laws to make it less likely that she will get caught in a situation like that again. But all of these things start by having conversations with people that are maybe going to be a little bit uncomfortable and are maybe a little bit more about conveying information than being right. And that's a hard thing for some people to wrap their heads around, but it's a critical thing to wrap your heads around. And again, same call to action that I do almost every week. Try to find 3 to 4 people that you can have a conversation about any of the topics that we've had on the show tonight, because that's how things could potentially change. So start a conversation. And then once you get that conversation started, keep the conversation going.